And we're live. Welcome back, everyone. Onan here today, and I got my favorite fellow heretic, Midnight Philosopher, in the studio. How are you, Midnight?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to join you again. It's been a couple weeks or maybe more.
Yeah, life got a little crazy in there, and so I apologize for all of you out there who's um, felt a noticeable improvement in your life without us for a
Mhm.
couple of weeks. So now you're back on the suffering train. So
No
yeah,
worries. We were just doing what pro Gooners do. We were keeping everybody on edge.
that's right. That's right. Uh, boy, I tell you, the anti-Gooners, I guess, are very animated and, what do I wanna say? Just very zealous, and, they're very, very quick to, throw that label around. It's a term I really hadn't even heard of. Jonah 1.0 pointed out that they've ruined, Goonies for him now, and I guess I didn't make the connection, but now it's, forever there, so sorry for everyone else that we just ruined one of your, favorite things of childhood.
Yeah. Sad. Yeah, I remember, yeah, Goonies or even just like calling someone a goon. I don't remember um that ever being associated with anything remotely sexual when I was a kid. So there goes another word struck from polite English commentary.
Well, and what's weird about it is it 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 feels to me like kinda like a 3rd grade way to do it, like, it's like we say, uh, poop and wee wee and stuff, like, it feels like a very juvenile term to use
Mhm.
that, to me at least, says as much about those that use the term than those of us that are accused of it, and, I find it fascinating how, in some of the, I would say, big Catholic names that go to that with very, very little evidence to back it up, and I'm not even sure, I think if you look it up, I think the common definition of it is much more narrow than, it's commonly thrown around in Catholic circles, but, I've been labeled that simply for acknowledging and talking about the fact that people, especially men, uh, deal with quote unquote self-abuse. Again, I don't even understand why that term gets used, but it's used. They can't seem to just use the real word. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, I don't know. They treat saying the word masturbation as if it's as bad or taboo as taking God's name in vain. They can't like say it out loud for fear of actually I don't know, for fear of something.
Well, it's weird. It's like it's right in the catechism. Like, I mean, they didn't call it gooning in section
Mhm.
2352. So
Yeah,
so
it
yeah.
reminds me it was I think it was Pilot. I haven't watched it myself, but I think it was Pilot and then another one of the members of the Discord where they were talking about John Farrell's latest video and how I know someone made a comment that they had like a third grade understanding of sex, and apparently some of the language they were using was literally like icky or ew or gross or blah 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 blah. And
Yeah.
yeah, it is like they have to resort to infantile language. I don't know. I think there's just such a deep discomfort with these topics.
Yeah, I just find it fascinating that they're just so bothered by it, but they can't even use the word or just use solo. That's sort of the word that we've used that I think
Hmm.
most people understand what that communicates, but we're not using the big old scary M word and whatever. But so
Hmm.
it's just it's a strange phenomenon
Hmm.
that I don't know what to make of it because that's never the way I've really
Yeah.
looked at it. That's not a name caller, but
Hmm.
that's what it is. So
Yeah. Or I remember one of my old homeschooling buddies. He had a really poetic. I don't know where he got it from, but his poetic description was flogging the one-eyed snake.
I mean, it's I don't know. I guess I get it. I've seen people on like I don't know, Reddit or whatever, like guys particular asking, how do I what do I tell the priest? Like they felt uncomfortable using the M word
Hmm.
and the priest. Now I'm like, I don't I mean, I don't think you'd go to tell the priest you were gooning, but
Mhm.
I guess whatever.
Yeah. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I resumed my gooning streak."
Yeah. I mean, I think around here the priest would be like, "Huh? What's that?" And then
Yeah.
it becomes real awkward because now you're gonna be like defining it for
Mhm.
him.
Yeah, man, it's we're in some strange territory. Yeah,
Yeah.
going back to the, the notion of that being such a recurring insult, it's just it is sad that especially when they engage with you, I mean, some of the I'm gonna assume that they're younger Twitter users, but it's like there's this sense of, Craig Onan can't possibly come up with these nuanced opinions unless he's a sexual degenerate. There's just no good faith engagement that, hey, maybe you are the father of 9 kids and you've been married for over 20 years and you might know a thing or two about the ups and downs of all of that.
Well, someone gave me a hard time today and said, how many of your
Mhm,
9 kids do you wish had, ended up in a Kleenex instead?" And I'm
mhm,
first of all, why do you, go there, first of all? Like, what I
mhm,
just and second of all, I would say I might have 10 kids,
mhm,
if it was less taboo because I maybe we would have had kids on a little more sensible time frame when we were, in a position or needed some space because we were moving or starting a new job or whatever.
mhm,
So for us, it hasn't been so much the number of kids, but just the the difficulty in timing them the way that you might otherwise. I think is one of the reasons why I feel very passionate about all this stuff. It's not that I would give up any of my kids, and like I said, I could honestly say I might have more, but the way that our marriage has kind of unfolded, we just always felt like we were just kinda running behind, playing catch
mhm,
up because the kids came maybe just a little faster than we were realistically ready for, and then we just got burnt out. Like,
mhm.
my wife really, I think, burned out, and I think we're at an age where could we theoretically have another one? Yeah, but we're just tired. Like, we're just tired and worn out in a way that I think wouldn't be the case if we weren't quite so paranoid about the Catholic rules. And I'm not even talking about contraception. Like, that's not even I mean, there's times that sounds like an attractive option, and I'm not I mean, if the church were to suddenly give some leeway to that, it's something I would probably think about a little bit. My wife is just really has no interest in that anyway.
Mhm.
But, that's not even so much it. Like I've said many times, I don't even think the NFP for most of us is the huge issue. It's like, what do you do with all the abstinence times? Either because you're trying not to get pregnant or because you have a lot of kids and you're just naturally constantly abstaining, it seems like, and giving people just some other options other than total abstinence or rolling the dice is, I think, all I'm really asking for is can we at least evaluate that a little bit?
Yeah, I think you're really onto something. There really is, I feel like there's an inability to confront that gray area of, you know, procreation aside, there still is a certain element of need, and I think it's all grouped under concupiscence,
Mhm.
as if, participating in hookup culture is the equivalent of using a condom in the context of a lifelong monogamous heterosexual marriage. Like, there doesn't seem to be a distinction. It's all categorized as concupiscence, and there's no real acknowledgement of need, or I think as you and Jonah 1.0 are always talking about, and how intimacy, even regardless of the procreative element, intimacy at least has some partial benefits that are in service of the union between husband and wife.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how anyone well, it's strange because the anti-Gooners, if I guess for lack of a better word, on the one hand, like to talk about how important the sexual union is and how all these other, let's say, disordered versions are terrible, but at the same time, they're just very ready to say, "Oh, sorry, you don't really need that. Just go abstain, live like cousins for weeks, months, if not years on end." And I just don't know how anyone could say that your marriage is better with prolonged abstinence or abstinence above and beyond what you might choose than it is with some reasonably frequent intimate life. It doesn't I'm not I don't even think you have to say that your marriage gets worse and starts to fall apart, although I think it can for a lot of people. But I think just almost objectively speaking, your marriage is better, all things being equal, all the same responsibilities, children, challenges. I think for gosh, 99% of couples, all of that is easier and better if they have that intimate aspect of their marriage on something of a regular basis. I just I don't know how you could say otherwise with a straight face.
Yeah. I don't know. It's difficult stuff. I think an interesting contradiction too is like you said that they advocate abstinence and living like cousins, and there seems to be a general dismissive attitude towards sexual desire, but then they'll turn around and also say that marriage debt is like the tradition of the church, and that the reluctant spouse has to put out, or else, someone commits a mortal sin, and that the purpose of the marriage debt is to prevent fornication. So implicit in that is that there is a certain need that's not being met
Yeah.
if a couple is not being intimate, and marriage debt is supposed to strengthen the union by preventing fornication. So it's sort of like those two things are at tension with one another. Is sex a need or is it not?
I agree.
Mhm.
I don't I just think to me those if they're not in conflict with each other, like you said, are definitely
Mhm.
in tension with each other. And I don't understand how they just dismiss that or can reconcile that. I don't think they really I just again, the problem here, if you want to call it a problem, is there isn't really much self-evaluation of the logical coherency of these positions because the end result is already predetermined. Like we're told this is what we believe, this is what you do. And then, so once there's no question or ambiguity about what the end conclusion is, then you can just kind of interchange these these different ideas or explanations irrespective of whether um they are compatible with each other because as long as each sort of arguably supports the conclusion, we're fine because that's the conclusion we have to reach, or not even we want to reach. That's the one we have to reach, right? And so
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
just
you're right.
so that is, I think that is a fundamental challenge when it comes to even talking or engaging with people because there isn't you're not really talking with people that are actually honestly and authentically trying to understand your position because if your position seems to be pointing to a different conclusion than the conclusion that it has to be, they just dismiss it before they really hear it and engage with it. And someone said today, um, they're like, I said, oh, I was using an analogy. Here's what I said. I said, I think teleology has some major problems, and if you wanted to use teleology, it would seem much more logical to me that unity is the primary purpose of the conjugal act because it's the only end that can be present each and every time a couple comes together, whereas procreation would become secondary from a teleological standpoint. And I said, "Well, I understand that's not what the church says. To me, that would be more logically sensible." And then, of course, they jumped to me, "Well, you just, we should ignore you because you said, that's not what the church says." My response to that is the church could still be right, but for the wrong reason. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't an argument, for why procreation is the primary purpose or end of the conjugal act. I just don't think teleology is a persuasive basis for it, but teleology is, like it or not, the foundation for the the articulated position that the church has, or the popes have used. And so my only point is, I don't think the rationale being offered actually makes sense, but it could, as I've always said, the pope could, have a vision from, from the Holy Spirit, and if he gets it in some sort of an infallible way, then fine. I mean, yeah, we believe that that's how we can know truth. I would actually find that to be a much more persuasive, possibly, reason than this teleology stuff that doesn't actually make sense. I don't think, if you really, at least in the sexual context, maybe in other contexts, it makes more sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think teleology seems like it's just more effective as a description rather than a prescription in
Yeah,
terms of rightness and wrongness.
yeah,
Because I mean, I don't think regardless of where you are in terms of the conservative and liberal spectrum
mhm,
of both politics and religion, I'm pretty sure that everyone can come to a very logical adult agreement that sex and reproduction are, inseparable. They're all part of the big picture.
yeah,
But I think the real conflict really is the moral aspects of how we regulate the procreative element and how we sort of engage in the intimate element and what amount of control we're able to exercise over those things. I think that's really where the debate is. No one's denying just how crucial procreation is, both in terms of just the existence and continuation of our species, but also the spiritual journey that comes with being a parent. I don't think anyone's debating that. It's just some people really are, by the book, by the letter of the law, and others are sort of advocating for flexibility. Just because I think the reason why all the sexual topics really cause, I mean, it seems to be, um, one of the major driving forces behind deconstructions and deconversions. It's because I think that's really where a lot of your theological
mm,
ideals and stuff are really at tension with your lived experience, and you're sort of you're forced to be at war with this part of your life that's really tangible, and then at some point for many people something's got to give, and unfortunately
mhm,
um theology will often lose that battle just because you're dealing with, like you said, like in the case of teleology, that's not really something you can directly experience in the same way that, you know, hitting someone, physically abusing them, or destroying someone's reputation. There's a kind of tangible effect from that you can see the harm that you inflict or that you suffer from. But like all the stuff pertaining to teleology, I mean, I think we have so many people in the community that share various stories about how bending the rules helped their marriage. And what are we supposed to do with that data?
yeah,
If it doesn't lead us to, the exact thing that Thomas Aquinas laid out, or it doesn't lead us to the same conclusions that Augustine came to. um, but yeah, like you said, the conclusion is mandatory. I just kind of like the last few days I've had that experience with some people on Twitter and YouTube where, I mean, I'm guilty of being provocative too, but at some point I'll try to be more of a gentleman about it. I don't always succeed, and certainly have a little bit of a hot head in the comment section, but I'll try to press them and get them to say something that strikes me as genuinely their opinion, but they'll just hide behind quotes of various popes and and
yeah,
and St. Thomas Aquinas. And I'm not dismissing their contributions to the tradition, but with some of these people, it literally does feel like you're arguing with AI, because they'll just spam you with a bunch of quotes, but you can never actually get it. Never feels that you're dealing with another human being that's really engaging with the material. They're just hiding behind these prefabricated answers, and for some reason they won't challenge them, and then they'll attack you for daring to think a little bit outside the box when these things don't add up in your real life, your day-to-day real life.
well, and for people that claim to put Thomas Aquinas on such a pedestal, and I'm not here to say he was a chump, but uh, I mean, I think he was, sort of seemed like he was a pretty smart guy. Um, I do think he was, limited by his circumstances in life and the type of information they had available to him. So I don't hold that against him. But if you just use Thomas Aquinas as an example, like now, whether he actually did this or not, I think is one thing, but he at least purported to anytime he had a question, the way the Summa is laid out, it's like, okay, what's the four strongest arguments against something I believe or we believe? So he claims to offer the strongest, not just cherry picking, but like what's the most compelling argument to the contrary, lays it out, tries to articulate it, and then responds to it. And I think I think that's more or less all we're trying to do here. And I do think that we do a better job of trying to more fairly characterize and understand the other side's position than they do of ours. I don't think they approach it in Thomistic fashion in that they are unable to grapple with even for conversational purposes, grapple with things that contradict what they um have been programmed or led to believe. And I don't think that's what we're actually called to do as Catholics. Maybe at the end of the day, at the when you wrap everything up, you got to ultimately um, defer your will and intellect what the church says, subject, let's say, to your conscience. But I don't think that means that vigorous intellectual debate and conversation is is wrong. And I actually think it's healthy and necessary. I think we've lost that. And I think it explains a lot of the problems we have.
Yeah. I want to say it was Aristotle that said something like argument is meant to reveal the truth, not create it.
Yeah.
And so I think to engage, sometimes even in sometimes an intensely confrontational way about, these controversial topics, I think um it can be very beneficial as long as we always strive to be as respectful and engage in good faith. I think it can really illuminate a lot of these complexities, and hopefully we can arrive at clearer answers.
Yeah.
And kind of regarding the legacy of Thomas Aquinas, maybe an analogy that could work is it's sort of like how we totally respect the Wright brothers for, getting us started in terms of building airplanes and discovering flight, but we don't build airplanes the same way they did. We can still appreciate the
Yeah.
innovation that led us to like our modern day aircrafts. And I think when it comes to philosophy and logic and all of that stuff, we can certainly, if St. Thomas moved us along in the big picture, starting from the ancient Greeks and into the medieval period. Like he was synthesizing a lot of information that was available to him at that time. But to insist that we approach all the problems in that way, it would kind of be like, no, let's continue to build airplanes exactly as the Wright brothers did.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good way to put it. I mean, let's just assume for purposes of discussion that Aquinas was the smartest man of his generation. Um, but Thomas Aquinas wouldn't know how to operate an iPhone. I mean, you put him into the modern world, he would um he would be bested, I think, in most disciplines other than maybe philosophy and theology, but he would be bested by a reasonably educated 8th grader or 10th grader, not because he's dumb, but because that's just the context in which he grew up. And I think we need to just keep that in mind. Like you said, take and appreciate the wisdom that he offered, the contributions he made to the process. But I think we got to stop treating it if that's like the end of the day. Like that's we don't need to really go any further than that. And that I think does seem to be the approach of the more traditional folks who are very, I mean, not even skeptical. I mean, quote unquote modernism is condemned, by was it Pius and some of the popes of the early 20th century. Um, but and I'm not saying that there aren't some aspects of modernism that are troublesome, but I think it has led to this idea that we just need to throw out any advancements, any acknowledgement that modern science or thought has anything to offer, and we just got to go back to the good old days, and that's it certainly coincides with sort of I don't know if regression, the retreat to the TLM liturgically and some of the older, and just how people have kind of gone back. You know, we're not even debating about birth control. They're not even on board with NFP. Like that's too modern. There is just this kind of wholesale. We just need to uh, do a complete reset, and I don't think that's what we're expected to do or should do.
Yeah, they really do. They prioritize the importance of consistency, or at least consistency on paper, because I think if we consider a wide variety of sources, there are always a number of different streams of thought on any given topic kind of coexisting, but kind of in terms of the mainstream teaching of the church, I think they do place a high priority on consistency over cognition. Like
Mhm.
there isn't much of a willingness to engage with or acquire new information. It's just keep it as is. And I think that it kind of ties into why there's so much within the TLM communities. There's often this backlash against Vatican II, because
Mhm.
the idea of any kind of doctrinal development or reevaluation of things that have come before is just so taboo. So you know, and that goes with the Novus Ordo, NFP, all of these things that they say has absolutely no basis in tradition. But it's not like, I mean, even reading some of Pope John Paul's language, it's the only thing he did was soften some rough edges. He still acknowledges something as traditional as like the marriage debt. He doesn't use that language. It's more like mutual submission, but there's still this acknowledgement of the husband and the wife have duties to one another.
Yeah.
And he elevated the importance of the unitive, which maybe that's the most cutting edge thing that he did, but implicit, there's always been a tradition of the love between spouses, and it's changed more so in emphasis rather than, he didn't blow everything up and start anew. It's not a completely new religion like some of the sedevacantists like to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the problem is, you know, for better or for worse for us as Catholics, one of the defining marks of the church, unlike pretty much every other, well, let's say Christian variation, is um the um perfection of truth and the singularity with which the church um identifies and professes the truth, and anything that would even give the appearance that the church has not always taught the truth or has had error or anything like that, really, it's kind of like, it shatters a window. You just kind of hit it one spot and the whole thing kind of, burst. And I think that is sort of I get it. Like I I think that is a major uh feature of Catholicism that makes it, like we've always said it, that Catholicism is strong, but it's also sort of rigid. It's kind of like a like a stone wall, like
Hmm.
strong, but if you hit it right way, the whole thing will crack and fall over because it doesn't have the flexibility to give and take. That I think is why so many people are so loath to you know to give any room to development or change. And here's where here's where I think I understand their concerns. I think they're legitimate. I mean, they just look at all of the examples where the door has been opened just a little bit in other religious faiths. I mean, it's hard to identify, at least in my limited experience, it's hard to identify a non-Catholic Christian sect other than, let's say, the Orthodox, that hasn't more or less just kind of lost any uniformity of doctrine and authority. I mean, it does kind of become a slippery slope. I think. I mean, maybe there's some, but I don't know. I can't think of it. I mean, within Anglicanism, I mean, I think there's certainly variations of it that are more conservative, but I think a lot of it is pretty darn liberal. Um, and so I get the concerns, but I think it's also one of the the difficulties that the church has in you know being able to um provide good pastoral care to people, billions of people that have, particular circumstances about their life that are unique to them.
Yeah, yeah. That kind of ties into that. I think we were discussing, that video of the Orthodox guy versus the Catholic guy. They were debating the morality of contraception,
Yeah.
and that was kind of, I ended up making a video on it last week. Just the whole Catholicism versus Orthodoxy as
Mhm.
filtered through that little debate clip. But yeah, it does speak to that thing that you just mentioned, that the strength of Catholicism and why it still continues to appeal to a lot in this generation is the uniformity of the relative uniformity of its tradition. And that's not to say every element of that is correct or always beneficial in a practical sense, but I think in an age where I think, at various levels, I do think that humanity is going through many types of identity crises, at an individual level, at a cultural level, with especially with um I mean, just our demographics are no longer, especially in the States, we're not homogenous. And so we're kind of negotiating cultural identity, racial identity. And, not to totally get canceled by commenting on it, but even all of the complexity surrounding discussions around gender, I think it can just feel like we've all been walking in quicksand for like the last decade, and we need something firm. And I think the church does offer I think um at its best, the church shouldn't be completely rigid, but it moves slowly because it takes, the time to really consider all of these complexities about existence. And so it won't change things willy-nilly. And I think there's something really special and something powerful about feeling anchored in something. And when it has the weight of centuries of tradition, it can unify you by making you feel like you really are part of this larger picture, and it gives you this connection to the divine and the spiritual realm in a way that, the perpetually fragmenting denominations of Protestantism can't really give you.
Mhm.
um so I think there is a certain strength in Catholicism, but and my hope would be that, I think, the church at large could recognize that we have this strength, but also feel secure that we've sort of established these pillars of our faith, that we can kind of let loose a little bit and take in new data and new experiences, and open up conversations in certain topics, while still, taking that characteristically slow and methodical approach to these things. We don't have to blow everything up, but we also don't have to threaten mortal sin at every turn.
Yeah. I one analogy that I was thinking about, and I apologize in advance if this gets us it just adds to the confusion, but, in business, there's this concept of a lot of businesses fail or fall or kind of flounder because they don't have any kinda written protocols, SOPs, standard operating procedures. They just kinda have, "Well, this is how we've always done it," or every person has their own little way of doing it. And then on the other hand, you have a place like McDonald's, which is they have such precise rules in place that that's how you can have the exact same looking, tasting hamburger in Kansas City as you can have in, Washington D.C. It's there's just everything is spelled out. Like there's no room really for discretion, which um, but what can happen in businesses, especially small businesses, is you know you s- there's a need for some uniformity. There's a need for clarity on what's required and why we do it, and so you start to implement these standard procedures that are written down and everyone follows it, and there's a clear and obvious benefit to that as compared to the prior alternative where there wasn't any uniformity, right? So you start to enjoy these obvious benefits that uniformity provides, even if it's not the best way to do it. The fact that everyone is doing it the same way and understands what's expected provides a great deal of benefit to that business because there's uniformity. Well, then what can happen is as you go along, then weird things happen. You're like, oh, I guess our we didn't account for that. So now you try to make another standard, or you provide more detail to the standard. And then at some point there's a tipping point where you have so much detail, so much protocol that it's impossible for people to keep up with, or it causes more harm because it takes out the human kind of creative, just adjusting to the circumstances component, right? Kind of like McDonald's. And so I think that's sort of what the church kind of struggles with is we need some standards, we need some uniformity, we need some guidance, but I think it's not always obvious where we should stop and where we're starting to, for lack of a better word, micromanage things or try to apply a written standard to apply to all kinds of situations which may not be exactly the same. And I think that's where the tension comes in is I think we do want and need that. I think that's the major problem for most non-Catholic Christian sects is they don't really have any stability or any stable guidance on what we're supposed to believe or what we're supposed to do. And I think that has its own problem, but I don't think it necessarily means that's the outcome if we say, "You know what? Let's just scale back the minutia of rules for a little bit and or standards or even just remove the label of intrinsic or always wrong and just say, let's say as a general proposition, do this or don't do that, but we also want to acknowledge that sometimes circumstances are different, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really brilliant analogy, like the standard of protocol for businesses, because I think in a sense that that goes along really well with well, the theological concept of everyone is a member of the body of Christ, and kind of in the same way that our human body is, every little organ, every cell kind of has its duty and it functions. I
Yeah.
think that that's sort of like what the church is aiming for with that sort of standard protocol approach, and it does, like, there is a certain cohesion, but like you said, that there needs to be room for the human element, because that is kind of, again, one of those things at tension where theoretically, yes, we could kind of take this automated approach. We become sort of like a factory in terms of just registering all of these commands and all of these, doctrinal and dogma stuff. But there is at some point it when the complexity of our human experiences, our emotions, our desires come into play, and that is kind of what separates man from machine. It is all of these nuances,
Yes.
these complexities that emerge with that you're not really able to account for instantly, and that's where we do need flexibility. I don't think it's a thing that has an easy answer, but and that's, I think that is where there is a certain strength in the orthodox church's approach of um kind of allowing for certain things to be case by case. So you do factor in that human element a bit without giving up your standards, but it's just, like you said, removing the harsh labels of intrinsically this or gravely evil that, where there is an understanding of the fallibility of human condition and factoring that into these various moral calculations.
I just think the creative capacity of humans is one of the things that really makes us makes us special, and like you said, it distinguishes us from machine. It also distinguishes us from all other animals, right? Is that
Mhm.
that creative component, the ability that look at what humans have done. We didn't stop at, you know, cooking, you know, chunks of mammoths over a fire, right? We developed, we created the wheel, we created houses and roofs and ways to heat, and then we figure out how to cool ourselves. Like the creativity in the imagination and resiliency of humans, I think, is what makes us so special. And I think that's where the tension arises, is we're not robots and machines. Yes, I think you can have general guideposts. There's certain things that are just um let's say black and white. I think the 10 commandments, for example, I don't think you need to have wiggle room on murder and adultery and stuff like that. But I think a lot of the stuff is a little less cut and dried than I think some people would like it to be. I think in the kind of under the I don't know when alchemy was a thing, but it's sort of out of that middle age time period. There was this sense that everything is perfectly ordered. Like there's a mathematical explanation for the universe, and if we could just figure out the right formula, we could literally make gold.
Mhm.
Or we could literally understand the function of everything, because God is perfect order, and so therefore this all has order, and we just need to reverse engineer it and come up with a formula, and we can predict exactly what people what reality is supposed to look like, and maybe eventually we'll get to that point. But I'm starting to think more and more that the lack of that precision and the lack of that type of like mathematical um predictability about everything is a feature, not a bug of humanity. It seems to be how God created us to be.
Yeah. Um, I don't, typical Catholic, I can't quote the Bible off the top of my head, but there's the line in Genesis about, um, subduing the earth and even, giving Adam the task of naming all the animals. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a certain authority and dominion that mankind has been gifted with, over nature. But for some reason, that dominion over nature stops when it comes to our own bodies, in a sense, which is kind of paradoxical. But I'm kind of gonna extempore or elaborate on something I heard from, I think it was some Protestant preacher on Instagram. I have to track down the original video, but it was the concept of, co-creation, as opposed to no, not opposed. Opposed isn't the right word, but alongside, our understanding of procreation is co-creation, where in taking control of certain elements of our sexuality, without violating the marital vows and without, you know, doing anything excessively liberal. But I think there's this idea of by taking a certain exercising a greater amount of control, it doesn't mean that we're thwarting God's purpose, but we're just taking a more active role in shaping, the experience of marriage and the experience of intimacy, and trusting our conscience and our gut with what we can handle and at what pace.
Mm.
Because I don't think, even the most, those Catholics that really struggle with the teachings on NFP and contraception, I I I don't think any of them have any, malicious bone that they wanna thwart God's authority or spit on church teaching. There really is this tension of, the reality of the human experience, and you're sort of tantalized by these tools that we could have access to shape these experiences, and for also for health and safety and economic reasons too, but we're just not allowed because of the letter of the law. But really, it's just, I think the debate really is, can we not take a more active role alongside, God's design?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective. And of course, the heretic alarms are already going off for
Mhm.
Chad's in the audience. But you know, there's a podcast that I follow. It's called Kingdom Sexuality. So it's a non-Catholic podcast, and
Mhm.
just to kind of hit hit this drive this point home, is it's not like the non-Catholics who aren't stuck using NFP can use contraception, can do some of these things that some Catholics think you can't. It's not like they're just without like their marriages are trouble free and everything. Like they have, oh, I would say just as much struggles as we do, just a different kind of struggle. But listening to them and hearing them talk, because they just had a question answer the other day. What are we and aren't we allowed to do in the bedroom? And as you can imagine, the list of like clear no-nos in the bedroom is much smaller for them. I think if you look at a kind of a kind of a typical evangelical conservative Christian, they're probably they're against abortion. They're probably against homosexuality for rightly or wrongly, and a lot of them are against, let's say, abortifacient uh, contraception, and I would say almost all of them are against pornography. But beyond that, they kinda look at it, is this good and wholesome for our marriage? And then some of the examples that you've used is maybe one spouse wants to use oral and the other one is not comfortable with that, and so they judge it not whether that's a proper use of the sexual organs, but is this good for our marriage? Is this does one of the spouses have some, you know, uh trauma or just one reason or another why they're just not comfortable with that. And so it is I think seen much more as an organic discovery process that the couple kind of, you just kind of you work your way through it and you trial and error and you test some things out and you know there's something. I don't think that's necessarily any easier. In many ways it may be more difficult than as a Catholic, where it's just kind of, depending who you ask, it's kind of laid out for you.
Mhm.
There's something beautiful about having that, like you said, that co-creative um, role in the process of figuring out for us in our marriage, or maybe at this season in our marriage, what is good and wholesome to our marriage, and where maybe we've gone too far in this direction and we need to recalibrate, or one of the spouses, finds themselves engaging in some sort of sin or whatever. There is something, there's something about that that seems very consistent with the creative, um, the way the humans are designed, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that to be able to make, your most personal marriage decisions with that within that framework of really, a little bit more room for experimentation and seeing what really is conducive to lifelong intimacy with your husband or wife.
Yeah.
And then also what creates a healthier environment for the family that you're raising too.
Yep.
Because I know you and Jonah have talked frequently about just whether it's been seasons in your own lives or lives of people you've known that kids can be very sensitive when mom and dad are not at their best,
Yeah.
and those repercussions will ripple into the next generation, and that's definitely, like, that's a heavy burden for
Mhm.
the parents that you have to that's also just part of all the calculations you have to run when you're making these decisions. And I think like you said, other marriages, secular or not, religious but non-Catholic, they're not going to be free from having a cross to bear.
Mhm.
It's just they have a bigger toolbox.
Yeah, and I think to sort of add on to that too is, you know, and this is where I think a lot of Catholics really struggle with these particular rules of the church, is that despite, let's say, the warnings, or the, let's say, even the Pope Paul the Sixth predictions in Humani Vitae, but there's this tendency among traditional Catholics to attribute all these horrible um effects or damages to quote unquote violations of the rules. But I think realistically that isn't always the case, and sometimes it's almost never the case, right? And so you have couples that are trying to, go through the normal ebb and flow of life and the challenges and difficulties of having a family and paying bills and all that. Marriage dynamics, as husbands and wives get to know each other and themselves. Um, so you have that, and then you have these just standards, you're like that. I I can't see any harm. Like, and maybe am I just that blind? Can I not see the harm? But I think people's like, there's no way you're going to convince me that doing this is going to have any harm to our marriage, and in fact, it's going to help our marriage. I mean, I think that's something that trads especially need to confront and grapple with is accept the reality that what you're telling people to do or not to do is you know objectively making their marriages worse or preventing them from making their marriage better. And I think they just kind of in Christopher West fashion can't comprehend that following the rules could not make your marriage better or violating them would make your marriage worse. I think they just think it's again, the conclusion is reached before we analyze the data. And so of course engaging in this act or that act is going to be harmful to the marriage. How could it not be? It's sinful, right? And so it becomes this kind of circular problem that they really don't stop in even entertain the possibility that people could have good, wholesome, fruitful marriages that are virtuous, even if they're not crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's that, you know, traditional Catholicism might indicate they're required to do.
Yeah, I think the difficult thing too with the standard line of attack of the, the most rigid of trads is there is an element of gaslighting. Like you said, if there are, if you actually can detect that certain parts of your marriage are improving by, being a little bit lax
Yeah.
on the rules, it'll always be something like, oh, your marriage isn't improving, you only think it's
Yeah.
improving because you're sort of surrendering your concupiscence. And that kind of gaslighting can be really damaging in the sense that you don't even know when you should be trusting your own ability to observe things in your life. And that can just, especially if you have a temperament that's prone to scrupulosity or OCD, I think that could be just really damaging when you're just never really allowed to trust your own observations. And kind of on the topic of concupiscence too. I mean, I know that it can easily become a slippery slope when when morality is judged exclusively by, majority rule. I don't mean to imply that the majority is always correct
Mhm.
when it makes a ruling. Like, for instance, if the majority of people supported abortion, that doesn't make abortion all of a sudden morally correct.
Right.
But I think when it comes to, all the things that they file under concupiscence, and when you kind of look at, the history in terms of how other cultures handled sexuality and stuff, even something saucy and spicy like the Kama Sutra, and then just various things that non-Catholics are just not concerned about. I mean, if the whole perverted faculty argument is true, I mean, that's a crap ton of sexual perversion that's just rampant throughout generations and generations and generations of humanity. And then it kind of makes you wonder, how in the world did something so essential to our survival become so easily corrupted, and literally that everyone's just going to hell over it. Um, it's kind of a grim view of our own bodies and our own desires, and it does kind of lead you to, it corners you into a place of despair. If everyone's just, perverted.
Well, either despair or even just a serious doubt of God, because I think for a lot of people, it's not possible to to harmonize that view of humanity with a concept of a God who designed us, who's also perfectly good and perfectly loving and all that. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why people I would say not even so much despair, they're just like, well, this got to be nonsense, like, right? I'm not, and so I think those are two very predictable outcomes that people have when they see that tension where they're required to eh, hold as if compatible these seemingly incompatible aspects of our faith and our view of God and our view of eternity. Some people, I think, do. to despair. Some people just throw up their hands and this can't be right and move on. And then I'm sure there's other combinations as well. But I know that, in talking to people, you know, I know people who have, reached out and said, look, I just could not follow the church's teaching on NFP. We used contraception and we consulted with priests and we did everything we possibly could to inform our conscience and felt absolutely convinced that our conscience was correct, that we could do that. But even that, they said, you still live with that uncertainty, that doubt. What if I'm wrong? And that's kind of the Catholic cross, is you just never know. There is, you know, that I think that is the thing that the once saved always saved people. I think that is a legitimate criticism they have of the, or observation they have of the church, is that how can you go through having like literally no confidence whatsoever of your salvation when you die? Um that I think that's a real issue.
Yeah, you're right, and having to I think in some ways that perpetual anxiety about the state of your salvation also just practically obscures your ability to make sound decisions
Oh
in
yeah.
either direction. Because I think the moment fear is a part of the equation, I think the integrity of your decision making is kind of compromised.
Yeah.
Um, that's just a tough spot to be in. I've definitely lurked on some parts of Reddit where some people have sadly made the decision to leave religion, but even if they do leave the practice of religion, they're still racked with fear and guilt
Oh
that
yeah.
they yeah, it once it's in your bones, it's not something that you can easily rid yourself of. It really is. It kinda sinks deep into your soul.
Yeah, and I think the problem is, just another person today made the argument that, one of the proofs that gooning is wrong is that people feel guilty afterwards. I'm like, well, people feel guilty because they've been told to feel guilty, and I think that's true for a lot of things. I mean, I think, they might say, well, the angst that person has while using contraception, or the person that's left faith, that worry is proof that they know they're doing something wrong. Well, I don't know that that's the truth. I think that's a natural human response to to things that you just simply cannot prove or disprove in this on this side of eternity, right? There's certain things you just cannot know one way or another.
Yeah. I think you're you're right on that, the whole guilt being, a matter of conditioning in some cases. We do have one of our friends in the Discord has made that comment that, it was fairly recently in their lives that they came across all of this guilt. A lot of the things that they had accepted as normal or healthy habits in terms of sexual things, it's like they hadn't encountered any issues in their personal life or marriage. But yeah, it's like once you sort of have this overbearing insistence that this makes you guilty, this makes you guilty, that makes you guilty, it can really warp your ability to perceive reality in terms of what is harmful and what isn't.
Yeah, and so I think that, I don't know. I mean, I guess we all struggle with that, right? And so maybe
Mhm.
maybe and again, I don't even fault the trad, so to speak. I understand why they're in that position and the factors that are leading them to that. But I do think that that fear and overconfidence is is kind of putting blinders on and causing them to, I guess, um, prematurely judge us in the arguments or questions that we raise, maybe because they're afraid of opening that door of their own mind to that, because there is something secure. There is a element of security of being like, okay, here's the playbook. I just gotta follow it, put my head down and grind it out, and then I can be maybe not certain, but much more confident that I'm living life the way that I'm supposed to, and I can have some optimism for my salvation.
Yeah, I think we there is a culture within Catholicism that depends so much on that the clerical stamp of approval that okay, you're doing good, buddy. Just keep it up. Kind of like a good coach in your corner when you're playing a sports game. I think something about the Catholic approach does kind of turn yeah, it does kind of turn spirituality into a sort of game where you're being coached. You have referees just making sure you're within the lines and you're facing the right direction. I think it is very much built into the culture.
Hmm. Yep. And so I don't know, I think it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and say, well, the Pope should do this or the bishop should do that, and I'm very sensitive to how easy it is for us to just kind of come on here and just speculate on a live stream or whatever. But I do think these are things that even if the church does nothing about it, I think it's helpful for people to understand that they're not alone if they find themselves like the example you were given before of this person that came into our Discord. I mean, they made it clear, maybe it was just to me, that how 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 helpful it was to know that they weren't alone and that there was other, there a community of people kind of sharing the same struggles. And I think if we do nothing more than help people know that you're not alone, you're not necessarily a horrible person because you have these questions or these doubts or these things in your life that you can't overcome. I think we all need to continue to try to do our best, pray, listen, and just, be be open to, God's revelation wherever it is, and not, I guess, put too many preconditions on what we'll accept as God's um inspiration to us. I think just be open to and trust that God has a plan for us, even if it causes us to be uncomfortable for a while or take some risks.
Yeah, yeah, I'm fully on board with that, and yes to the I think the consolation of having a community for sure, and
Mhm.
then also a community that won't delete your comments if you
Yeah.
happen to deviate from the script.
Yeah, I agree.
I
So
think yeah, it's really valuable that everybody in the UCM Discord can.
yeah,
It really is open and honest conversations,
yep.
and to know that we're not going to cancel you just because your experience is different from the mainstream, and we're hoping we can learn from each other, and yeah, we're in it together, and no one gets left behind.
I think by your fruits you will know them, and I really do think, I think we are blessed with a wide range of people with uh, different issues, but common decency and empathy and love and respect that is like you said, kind of hard to find nowadays. And so hopefully we can continue to provide and grow that environment for people to try to work through the trials of life with in a community sorts, even if we're not physically present with each other. We can be united in spirit and on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Twitter, our Gooner army on Twitter.
exactly. So all right, well, that seems like a good place to wrap it up. We've been going about an hour, and so there was pretty good number of people watching the stream, but no comments, so that's okay.
Mhm.
I think that just means that you're just so enthralling that they just didn't want to interrupt the flow.
Yeah, I'll take that. That's a good vibe. But I'm sure, yeah, I know that I think due to some time zone differences, I think some people did say that they'll get caught up on the stream later. So maybe the comment section will be lively.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hope so. So, um, why don't you, for those that aren't familiar yet with your channel, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing over on YouTube, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Sure, sounds good. Well, yeah, largely inspired by Craig Onan and Uncharted Catholic Man, and of course, good old Kevin on Tradicath. I just
Mhm.
decided to start thinking out loud about some stuff that's been on my mind. So I make it a so far, knock on wood. I've been making my Monday night midnight streak of posting a weekly video essay. So far, my biggest hit, what somewhat unexpectedly, was that video last week on Catholicism and orthodoxy.
Sure.
Maybe I've been getting better at like clickbaity thumbnails. So
There
I might revisit that topic of comparing Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and besides that, like a couple of my reaction to Brian Holdsworth videos have been relatively popular too. So and I think with reacting to Brian Holdsworth is I mean, because he's just such a chill guy, and
yeah.
it's easy to listen to his content over and over again and engage with his points as honestly as I can. It's pretty nice because if I try to react to like Father Ripperger or Tim Gordon, I think it can sometimes be so vomit inducing. I don't know. It might take me a year to come up with a 5-minute video for their stuff. But yeah, so you can definitely expect more conversations about stuff that Brian Holdsworth is posting, and just other video essays from the mind of Midnight Philosopher every week, Mondays late at night.
Is your YouTube channel then Midnight Philosopher? Is that how people can find you?
Yeah, they can Google Midnight Philosopher. I think the exact username is Midnight Philosophy Podcast.
Okay.
But yeah, even if you Google Midnight Philosophy, it seems that it's starting to come up in the top results. So
Get that
yeah,
trademark before someone takes it from you.
yeah, I gotta figure that out.
All right. Well, it's always fun. I always enjoy these conversations, and hopefully things will work out that we can come back next Monday and continue
Yeah,
that
that
conversation.
would be cool. I mean, thanks for being a podcasting Mormon, having
Yeah,
more than one partner.
that's right. I enjoy doing it, so it's fun to have these conversations.
Mhm.
Thanks everyone for watching. Everyone that shows up afterwards in the comments, thank you as always, Midnight. And until next time, everyone, have a good one.